So it is my delight to an honor to introduce all of you folks to Brad Hoge. And my I met uh, uh, Brad Hoge at the start of this academic year when he came to our my daughter's school as one of the teachers and the um, and I was thinking like, who is this new fellow? And I started to read about your bio, and the more I did, the more excited I got. That Found out that you were the first thing that caught my eye was that you had spent time working at the National Center for Science Education. And
Yes.
that's an organization that I love and have supported for years. They really help us develop curriculum to teach science as it is. And so that was one of my things that got me initially excited. And then once I started talking to you,
Mhm.
um, I found out that you also are you're a poet,
Yes.
and um, I now have and I've got oops, yep, I've got two of your books here,
Mhm.
and you're working on more on another collection of your poetry. You have been a professor of science and a teacher of science in at the university in Houston,
Houston, yes.
and are now teaching literacy at my daughter's school, and we're so lucky to have you here.
Well, I appreciate you saying that.
Well, what I as I read through your poems, I was struck by several things. Um, One being that there is a tremendous amount of nature imagery and science imagery that is a backbone to your work. And then you will draw on that imagery to make really powerful and, to me, accessible um, revelations about the process of being a human being. Um, I'm seeing there's really personal things about what it's like to be a papa,
Uh-huh.
um, or just to be alive on this planet. So I found this stuff um, sort of intellectually really engaging. I found it also personally, it felt relevant to me. And also your sense of humor comes across in a bunch of these. And that's really fun. So let's see, to what our plans today. We're first for for friends at home, the plan is we're just going to talk about poetry a little bit. We're going to share some of these poems and talk about them and a little bit of the process that goes behind them. We know that a lot of you folks here are makers, and you are working in your own journals, and you are writing poems yourself, or you would like to include poetry in your process. So we'll also be talking about kind of what does the process of building these things look like, and and then at the end of this, we're going to have some time for all of you to ask Brad any questions that you have about the process, or anything that is relevant to you. So what I recommend you do is, as you are taking notes on this, is also to write down any questions that you have. Because very often, if a question comes to you at the end, you're thinking like, "Oh, I had a question. What was that? What was that?" But then it will have slipped your mind. But so let's keep track of all of those, and and then at the end we can have a lively and dynamic question and answer time with Brad. So perhaps we should start with some poetry.
Okay.
Now, and I was and also there's I understand that there's also some poetry that is not that's not in these that we'll have also a chance to look at. But maybe we can start with is there a poem that you have written that you as you're sort of sitting in your chair right now, you're thinking like, this is a fun one. This is one that kind of might be sort of representative of your approach to playing with words.
Sure. Yeah, so you were picking up Nebular Hypothesis, which is my first book. And actually the first poem in that book has always been kind of my personal favorite, that speaks to the perspective that I'm looking for in most of my poetry. The title is Breathe, and I'll go ahead and read it. There doesn't have to be a prayer in every observation of nature, every song heard from bird unseen. There doesn't have to be design. As the world spins day to night, summer to winter, eon to eon, there doesn't have to be forgiveness for loneliness, for coyote. Howl, and the wind carves canyons. Weep, and rivers widen. Sit quietly, and plants will grow, and mountains will crumble, and bones will mineralize as the moon passes in and out of shadow, and your breath quells the stars. So it has a lot to do with, again, my background is in ecology and paleoecology and deep time, as well as personal experience, and our place in all of it, how we fit within more of an existential position than a religious one, but certainly I think that speaks to sort of where I tend to come from, trying to find inspiration for my poetry.
The line and your breath, it sort of ends with the line, and your breath quells the stars. Can you unpack that for me a little bit?
Well, there's I guess a question of our significance. So I present this as a person within the universe and within time, and how significant are we individually? And so that line at the end kind of pulls it into a personal experience of the fact that every time you breathe in and out, you've increased entropy in the universe. And that may or may not be, a personally valuable thing or something you might not think about, but for me, it makes me integral and part of this bigger thing, even at that level of simply breathing and moving, and the fact that that's the progression of time, and that the connection between entropy and time was also kind of what I was picking up on that.
I love Carl Sagan's thinking and sort of musing about us being made out of stardust, and then this is sort of taking this in a different direction, that we are also just sort of diffusing the energy of the universe through just the act of being. You
mentioned NCSE, and one of the reasons I was there was I've taught about climate change, but also about evolution. And as an evolutionary scientist, the role of deep time in where we are now is something that plays a part in evolution and how we've evolved and found our place here. And there's some kind of, there's a point at which, where there was 200,000 or 400,000 years ago, where our consciousness kind of changed into one that is more aware of our existential existence. That point in our evolution is kind of an interesting one to me. So I might be going in circles here, but I'm just trying to think what that kind of gets to is, again, this place in not only our current present spot in the universe or place in the universe, but this history of our own evolution in light of the history of the universe and how entropy kind of drives all of that forward in many ways.
So that's something I see in a number of your poems.
Mm-hmm.
Here you're taking an idea of entropy, and that is sort of woven into this poem.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of these, I'm seeing that there's a scientific concept or an idea that is in the background behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes it's presented as the foreground thing, and you think that that's what you're talking about, but really then that ends up being this metaphor for for something deeper. I think a kind of a good example of that is even in this collection of poetry called the Drake Equation. Your poem by that name is doing just that. For folks who aren't familiar with the idea of the Drake it was sort of a mathematical formula trying to kind of begin to sort of grossly put some parameters around what are our chances of encountering a signal from a extraterrestrial civilization, some other advanced civilization somewhere out in space. What are the chances of us, through, say, the SETI program, being able to pick up one of those signals? And there are several parts of the equation. You're looking at the number of stars that are out there, the number of the stars that have planets, the number of planets that are habitable, the number of habitable planets where life might appear, the number of, and these then in the equation get multiplied together, and you end up with kind of a very kind of a loose guess, but still a guess, sort of a starting place for thinking about what is the likelihood of the possibility of kind of connecting out there with connecting from here with somebody from out there. Would you read that poem to us?
Sure. I cannot stand in my front yard and see, as I peer towards downtown, all of the street lights and shop lights, headlights and taillights spread out in an arc of discrete points, some nearby, some far away, but also relatively close. They appear to be equally distributed on the horizon. I can, in some places, still stare upwards towards the Milky Way's black hole center through the span of light years and see the disk of stars between me and line of sight, like a road upon which I have only to wander to search for neighbors out on this same night, to wave as I stroll by and say, "How are you? How you been? Where are you going on such a fair night?" And depending on the time of night and the distance I can travel before the sun rises, and on how many neighbors leave their lights on throughout the night rather than turning them off, and how many also cannot sleep and are restless enough to wander out in search of companionship or friendly conversation. If I am also welcoming, non-threatening, not seen as a child running away from home or lost, aimless and afraid. If all these conditions are met, then the odds of finding what I'm looking for might slightly exceed random walk, directionless, unguided, as likely to end in total darkness as redemption, opening the possibility of finding a fellow wanderer willing to help me find my way home.
So there you are, you're looking out just down the hill and out into city lights.
Right.
And using that, the possibility of finding another person out wandering that night as a metaphor for the Drake equation. And the last line of that poem, again, read that to us.
Just the last line is opening the possibility of finding a fellow wanderer willing to help me find my way home. I like the play of wander and wonder. Kind of became a theme for me around the time I wrote this, thinking of how similar they are. I've always, throughout my life, I've just kind of wandered. I remember early childhood, I would walk to school, and on the way home, I would walk through all the alleyways and take like an hour to get home. Hiking trails and becoming an ecologist, and even now, but my best way of getting connecting to things is to just go out and walk and wonder, but wander and wonder at the same time.
Is it okay with you if I steal that connection between wanderer
Sure.
and wanderer?
Yeah, no problem.
The the so I think that you know that's sort of a great example of sort of this idea of the Drake equation.
Mhm.
This scientific idea, then as a sort of as a metaphor for us sort of in our own lives, kind of making our way along and trying to figure this out, trying to make meaningful connections with other people.
Mhm.
The and you mentioned sort of wondering, and which is a great a pastime of mine. And I saw that you actually had a poem about questions. I think it was in here in the Drake equation. Um, where can I? This you're the. Oh, now I'm not putting my finger on it. My finger was on it earlier today. The the not it wasn't like the ultimate question. The
Well,
uh
but I've got a poem called Ultimate Compromise that isn't published anywhere yet, so I'm
it's
trying
not
to
that.
think what it might be.
Let's go with the question. The question. This is from the Nebular Hypothesis.
Okay.
Uh, and um, I thought this was also just sort of a wonderful kind of look at sort of the idea of um, I'm very interested in just sort of the process of being curious.
Mhm.
In this, you kind of give us you're looking at sort of what is kind of the a fundamental question for us in living our lives. Um, might you read this one?
Sure. And this one does play into sort of a dichotomy of sorts. Of course, I don't like dichotomies at all, but as a scientist and a poet, it kind of presents this to me as what type of observation, what type of artistic expression is more valuable. And of course, I don't think there's an answer to that, whether it's nature or human produced art. So the question is not whether it is nobler to see the world as a painting or as a story, see the beauty of a landscape or hear the crash of ocean waves cascading from mountains, to watch the flight of a butterfly or feel the kinship of shared ancestry, the beauty of a moment versus the grandeur of history, appreciation of time's brush. The question isn't about nobility or beauty or the quality of experience. The question is, how long are you content to be still?
So
I think I
much.
might be. Oh, there you go.
So as I said, so much of my nature journaling practice is about trying to find a way to be still, by kind of put myself in the presence of grandeur and awe and wonder, and just be there with something. I think sometimes I find myself being very busy in my head. And this is also what I love about this is also just this permission to be with these moments and just in sort of silent, reverent awe.
Right.
For
I'm afraid my connection might be a little bad. You've frozen on me a couple times.
oh no, I hope that that doesn't happen more. The
Right.
so fortunately, actually, so Avea, if I disappear, we're going to bounce over to you. For some reason, my internet connection on a regular basis has recently decided just to freeze up, and then I disappear after that, and I have to close down my computer and log on. So if I do disappear, please be patient. The conversation can continue with Avea, and perhaps questions from our audience, but we hope that won't happen. There are themes in your work that I really connect with. At first, I was looking through your work. The first one that I read was your most recent one, the Drake equation, which I find is also sort of you're taking kind of a scientific metaphor and then sort of playing that into the human experience. As I read through the Nebular Hypothesis, it seemed that the inspiration was also often coming from just from your experience of being a father.
Right.
And so just whatever it seems that there's whatever life is giving you, you're going to build on that and to play with that. The and the one that this also kind of maybe just sort of to show you kind of how a sense of humor also can kind of play up in these. I was really delighted with the poem "What If a Nice Dinosaur Lived Here?"
Yeah.
And the and so this as far as sort of your so that's on page 46 of Nebular Hypothesis. This connected with me as a scientist because I find myself often with my children like really kind of I'm geeking out about this thing over here, but when I'm not reading the room, I'm so
Right.
into whatever it is that I'm whatever rabbit hole I'm going down, that I'm not necessarily connecting to where they were. And so I found this poem just so playful and human and joyful. So let's put that one on the table too.
Sure. Yeah, this was the quote is my son, and I was carrying him on my shoulders in Carlsbad Caverns. And of course, I'm looking at, well, I'll read the poem and then we can talk a little bit more about it. But you're right. I was looking at one thing and he was processing something else. My older son's hand fits in mine like a moment of time. His younger brother sleeping on my shoulders as I lead them through the great room of Carlsbad Caverns for the first time. Look at how the rock flows, I say, as if a river left it here. What if a nice dinosaur still lives here? My son replies. But my mind has already wandered. As we walk through this frozen world, I can't help but think the smooth calcium carbonate walls look like cotton candy poured while hot over a surprise inside, preserving an unknown flavor until someone bites through it. If I could take my sons through these walls, we would swim into the ancient reef that guarded the shores of the Permian Ocean. We would taste the brine, now crystallized into Guadalupe Mountains, flee from sharks with shovel noses, chase trilobites into the sand, pick crinoids like flowers from the reef. until my son's daddy returns me to the present. Oh, there's nothing to be afraid of, sweetie. There aren't any dinosaurs in this cave. I know, Daddy. I know they all died a long time ago. But what if a nice dinosaur still lives here?
Ah, see that for me that just that brings together sort of the science geek in me,
Hmm.
and also just these fragile little moments that we get as when if we're lucky enough to pay attention to them,
Right.
that are they're so fleeting, they're so beautiful, they're so poignant. And if you hadn't written that poem, that
Mhm.
moment, you would have forgotten it.
Yeah, could have.
And we think
I
that like,
started, I mean, I've journaled my poetries for all along the way, and I was a full-time parent at the time, staying home with we have 3 children. So I wrote that down in my journal as soon as he said it, because I'm like, I gotta have to capture that. That is hilarious. And then I could come back to it later and write about it. But it was because of the journaling that I've always done with, uh, you know, I do draw, but most of it's just poetry and writing down ideas. And I've been doing that for a long time, because that son is now 29 years old. Yeah.
my kids aren't going to grow up
All right.
though. The and do you have some of those journals with you?
I'm afraid most of them are in my classroom now. I took them to, I have my most recent ones um, that I've been kind of writing in recently. But the one that, for instance, that quote is in would be at St. Timothy.
Yeah. Um, yeah. These the moments that we also have. I've got a journal here of kind of these crazy moments that we kind of get with the family, and I draw little cartoons of them saying things to mama or myself. And when I don't have access to that book, I'll drop them into my regular journal.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting when I first started. I had been doing like as journalists, all sort of like the science things,
Yeah.
and it contained none of these sort of really kind of personal, effective moments. Um, and so that's why I even started kind of having all those observations in a different notebook, because I couldn't put it in my nature journal.
Right.
And but recently what I've been doing is as things happen, just like it all goes in the same book,
Right.
because that's the way we're living it. That's the way we're experiencing it. And the idea that I'm going to have nature over here and I'm going to have me over here, that's sort of taking me out of the picture. And I'm just as much a part of
That's right.
all of this as the trilobite, as as the walls of that as the walls of that cave.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I do love the idea of you swimming into that wall of the
Right.
cavern with your kids and
Right.
chasing trilobites and picking crinoids, and just like what you would do as a daddy,
Mm-hmm.
having fun with your family, right? In
Yeah.
some ancient ocean, and look out for those sharks.
Yeah. Our children were all born and raised in Houston, and I used to take them to my parents' house in New Mexico, where my parents retired. And that drive from Houston to Cloudcroft, New Mexico, takes you through not the Cretaceous beds, and then the Permian Basin, and then Carlsbad Caverns, the Guadalupe Mountains, which are the reef around that basin. I mean, you drive through so many different geological vistas that I've always thought, I mean, I've always taught a lot of my students. I would say, look, this is the value of education. It's not your job, your career. It's your ability to see more, your ability to experience more, to be part of more. So for me, making that drive every spring break was being able to look at 3 different oceans and think about what that vista actually would have been at that time. And that's an exciting experience for me. And I've tried to convey that in a number of the poems that are in Nebular Hypothesis, for instance, because it was written during those trips. So that's just one of many.
Another one that was sort of less on the science side, but all about kind of showing up and being present in this world. So I remember one of your poems where you're just watching your son in a barber shop.
Yeah. Getting his haircut. Yeah.
Yeah, getting a haircut. And you know, so folks think about, like, you're just going about your regular daily stuff and a little insight comes to you. What if we were to capture those insights in our journals? And a way of doing that is to try to play with it and turn it into a poem. And this, you know, they don't have to rhyme. But just a little more kind of care with kind of playing with those ideas turns them into something special. Do you have access to that barbershop one?
Yeah, I have it. It wasn't interesting. As I read this, I get a lot of the metaphor that I use. I mean, I'm an ecologist, not a physicist or a cosmologist, but a lot of it does come from those kinds of metaphors. And this, well, again, I can answer some questions about it or talk a little bit more about it. This was kind of reflecting on what is the place of this moment within this sort of bigger existence. Barbershop mirror. The young boy sat in the seat just beyond my son from the vantage point of where I was sitting. And as he jammered on while my son glared, it was like a kaleidoscope of time. But the changeling that is my teenage son is not the poem I want to write. The juxtaposition of my memories of him as a young boy, now remote, as if that boy never existed. Now, that's not it either. It has something to do with the nature of space and time itself, how every moment exists at once. Time and illusion are moving from one moment to the next through space, creating perception of change, though each moment that has ever been and will be are still there, already there. And of course, in an infinite number of universes, every possible moment exists. And the poem I want to write isn't about how disquieting this realization is to my ego and delusion of free will, but rather how, as a father, I'm treasuring this moment and would not trade it for the world.
That's the theory, sort of thinking about sort of time. And sort of time traveling, looking at the boy in the other seat, and then realizing that there's nothing more precious than sort of being there and being present and being with the teenage boy that you now have.
Right. Yeah,
gets me both as a philosopher and as a daddy.
Yeah, that was my goal. Yeah, it's there's a lot in that poem in terms of theory. There's a couple different things. One is the time being all existing at once, and we're simply moving through time. That's one way of explaining time from a physics perspective. The infinite universe perspective, of course, is the other one that's in there. They're kind of separate perspectives on how do we connect quantum reality and the larger concepts of time and space. So, when you really go deep into those kinds of phenomena, it does become really humbling that, you know, again, that our significance may be small, but when you live in the moment, it's as big as the universe.
See, that's why I wanted to have you, why I wanted to kind of introduce you to people in this this community. Your ability to sort of play with big concepts and ideas in a poetic form, and then to tie that back into something that kind of grounds it and roots it in our everyday experience is makes the daddy in me feel that I can appreciate the philosophy, and the philosopher in me be able to appreciate the daddy. That's so when you're creating something like this, what does your process look like? What are you are you doing it all in one shot? Does something kind of, this sparks an idea and you kind of go after that? Are you thinking to yourself, like, I would like to write something metaphorical about the Drake equation? Or are you experiencing something and kind of looking out at the city at night and kind of saying to yourself, well, that's kind of like the Drake equation? Sort of what direction are you going in? Or is it just different sorts of
it's a
things?
combination. It's certainly a combination of things. As I mentioned, I do write down notes or musings of things that occur to me during a hike, or you know, I keep one in a journal in my car, one by the bed, and one in my backpack. Yeah, I used to do that. Now I have only one, but I used to always have three, so that no matter where I was, I could write down the idea that I might have had. And then I go back to those and flesh those out as poems. Sometimes, however, it's more about just sitting in a coffee shop and musing, and then, oh, a light turns on, and you kind of write the whole poem. Very rarely does it end up being the final version, but every once in a while it is. The poem just is there, and you write it down, and I go back to it later to see if it holds up to scrutiny, and it does. It's kind of interesting how different the experience can be. There are a lot of ways as transitioning from, you know, being a father and a scientist. It kind of gave me a lot of grist for poetry early on in the Nebular Hypothesis as a result of that. The Drake equation is a little bit, you know, once my children were grown, what do I do now? What do I write about now? And so these are this book, the Drake equation, has a little bit of a different type of process. It's a little bit more of simply looking for things to write about, thinking about things or experiences that I've had that I could write about. And there are ekphrastic poems in Nebular Hypothesis. There are a lot of poems in Drake equation based on photographs that I've taken while I've been hiking. That's lately been kind of my biggest resource, is just like hike. I take a bunch of pictures, take some notes in my journals, and then I go back and try to look at the photograph, and usually it sparks something in my mind that might not be real obvious from the photograph, but to me they work together.
I was seeing you've written some poems where you're looking at a painting or a sculpture, and that then inspires a poem. And I guess this is using the photographs as the same sort of thing. So with some of those ones where you're looking at a painting, maybe what we could do is I could for a number of the ones where you were looking at a painting, it just starts with a little kind of a line at the start. You're saying I'm in this gallery of this museum and I'm looking at this painting, and here's what kind of comes to you. I thought what would be kind of fun for a bunch of those, for actually all of those, I should say. I was saying, like, I don't know that painting, so I had to go look up the painting. so I thought maybe I could share the painting and you could share the poem, and then we could kind of look at like what is the thinking behind that is tying, looking at this painting, and for sort of thinking about this process, folks, think about you're out on a hike somewhere and you come up with, it doesn't have to be a painting,
Right.
right? It could be the mushroom,
Exactly.
right? And that can spin you off in some direction. So the I was thinking either maybe redshift or double slit.
Okay.
Which one of those is the most fun for you?
I think double slit experiment was one that I've spent a little bit more time on trying to get it right, so to speak. It's based on the photo of actually an installment of an art piece. The picture that I think you had earlier, the one that I have actually
Yep. Let me.
background on my computer. Yeah.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite
Okay.
pieces.
So let me bring up this. So here you are. You're in an art gallery, and you come across. Now, where's the right button to push?
Yeah, the artist is Richard Long, and this installation has been placed in different places. It doesn't always look like it does in this image, but this image is at the Tate Gallery in London. I didn't actually get to visit it there, but I found this photograph, and it just really struck me. And again, sort of tying together a disordered, jagged edged rocks, but putting them into such an ordered space. So this is the poem that I wrote, Double Slit Experiment. An interesting arrangement of jagged broken stones, placed deliberately to represent an unnatural order. In this installation, a pathway. In other venues, laid out in various congruous juxtapositions with surrounding space. In the Tate Gallery display, they lead through a portal, across a slate floor, walls of stone rising on either side to ionic columns holding the passage open. Where the light shines is fracturing. Where darkness is allowed, the smooth curvature of space-time. Did Long intend to guide us into the light or into darkness? If we project light, we follow chaos. Wherever the light touches, particles are fixed into stochastic consequence, each encounter requiring the next, brought together at angles to each other. If we look away, then everything is possible. Color in superposition, stone and sea and sky, past, present, and future, up, down, inside, outside, singularity. To see where the path will take us, we must open our eyes, allow light through pupil onto retina, carried by synapse into mind. Let it all collapse into walls and passageways, tumbling into complexity, never to be whole again.
Right, let's see here. So tell us a little bit about the as you're looking at this art installation, you're tying this also into to sort of scientific ideas. Where unpack for us some of the sort of the theories and concepts that you are playing with here.
Well, the metaphor of the poem is in the title. All right, the double slit experiment is one of the early experiments done in quantum mechanics research to try to determine what whether light is a particle or a wave, and it's both. And this realization that photons are both particles and waves at the same time, and that it brings into Schrodinger's equations and all kinds of things that question our sense of our realities. How do we know what is real when we boil things down to the smallest parts and they're unpredictable and can exist in more than one place at the same time and have both properties that we normally associate with completely different phenomena. So looking at things from that perspective in terms of how do we connect our own experiences to this sort of quantum fabric or the realities that we find in quantum mechanics. That's where the double slit experiment is. It was the first experiment done where they passed electrons through one slit and measured the impacts of the electrons in the screen behind it, added a second slit and measured the what they saw on the screen. It became a wave pattern, which meant basically that the particles couldn't be experienced, or it can't be defined until you interact with them. And in the interaction with the particle, if you turn the lights on, for instance, then you get two lines. You don't get the whole wave spectrum. There's a complicated explanation for it, but it gets to the idea that our reality, what we know as reality, is more or less the result of these quantum interactions happening in such complex ways that it kind of ties things together into a whole. But if you go deeper and deeper and deeper, it unravels. It becomes just sort of a more random, probabilistic universe that we live in. So it's kind of a way to, and the reason I like that installation, that artwork or that sculpture, is just that it speaks to both things, right? It takes these jagged, broken pieces, puts them into this really nice installation, but you have, to really appreciate it, you've got light shining on the surface, but you've also got the shadows and all the fragments, and so what I'm trying to convey, whether I'm very successful at it or not, is because we perceive the world through light and other stimuli, we're limited in what we see to the results of those quantum interactions. We'd have to close our eyes to really try to get back to that singularity that has everything. And it gets to entropy again. In that state, it's perfect entropy. And as it unravels, as light emerges and we see things, it's all falling apart. But what we see as the universe falling apart is the organization that we rely upon for our reality.
This is, so you're in writing your poems, you are sometimes playing with an object, something that you see, an experience, a place you're having with people, family. There's some phenomenon that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You're letting all this information coming in and kind of play with your sort of your intellectual curiosities and seeing how those things kind of connect together and letting that come out in a new and playful way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As far as the for many people kind of going into something like this, I think that the idea of writing a poem can be intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
What would you suggest to people as a way, kind of an entrance in to kind of get our brains not to, like, some people will say, like, I won't draw because I'm not an artist, and then they don't draw.
Yeah.
And then they're not, right?
Right.
And other people will say, like I'm not a poet, so I don't write poems, and so you're not, because you don't do it.
Right.
What suggestions do you have to kind of might you have to kind of help people kind of get in and start to play with this mode, with this medium in their own journals? Actually, maybe to, yeah. So what would you suggest to people to kind of, if you're feeling intimidated about, notice that first I should say, like, there's a bunch of kind of science references in here because you have a big science background.
Right.
If you had a different background, then the references in your poetry would be with something else. So
Right.
whatever is meaningful to you, you can let that be. And so don't think you're like, but I don't know about the Drake equation, so I can't write these kinds of poems. But how might you suggest that people kind of kind of get in there and start?
Well, there's a number of ways. I mean, I've been writing poems for a long time, and so when I first started writing these kinds of poems with this kind of strong science metaphor, that was unusual. There weren't a lot of poets that were doing. There were a few, but now there's a lot more. I think that as our society accepts more and more of these concepts into our fiction, as well as nonfiction, a lot more people are able to connect with that. So it's allowed for me to continue writing that metaphor, and as you said, that's where I come from. Everybody has a source of something to relate to the world around them. How do you relate to the world? How do you find your place in it? And how do you connect to it? And it might be an invention, or it might be in painting, or in many other ways. All right, it can even be mathematics, or I know a lot of poets who are engineers and mathematicians and so on. So whatever your own connection is, that's what you should explore. And I think that, as I said before, it starts with the journaling. I mean, it starts with writing down ideas. It doesn't always write down a poem right away. Sometimes it does. And as you get going and it kind of becomes more of something that you're expecting to happen, then it'll happen more. I like the way you described it. If you don't think you can draw, then you can't, right? If you have to try, you have to start.
And you can't. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a number of prompts. When I first started writing in the Nebular Hypothesis, it mostly came from those experiences I had with my children, and those moments and those observations that I would jot down in a journal. As they grew up, it became more, things that I saw at art museums and galleries and in nature, and writing about those things from a philosophical perspective. I have lately been, again, using my photographs, but also prompts. There are a number of really good places where you can find a prompt that'll basically say, think about like your personality and write about some specific thing. The general guidelines are write every day. I don't do that. I'm not real good at that. But that's, if you're really trying to get started with it, you have to do it. You have to write something every day. And again, none of my poetry rhymes. Well, that's not quite true, but even my rhyme schemes, when I do rhyme, they're kind of hard to see. But the point is that they eventually will emerge. Emergence, as an evolutionary biologist, is kind of an important concept in a lot of what I write too. Is how do you get these traits or these aspects of reality that you can't reduce down to a quantum level or to an atomic level? They emerge from complexity itself. And so that's kind of the process to me of writing poetry. Is you've got this complexity all around you and within you. And as you find little connections between your complexity and the complexity of the world, you jot that down, you write that down, and you think about it. You roll it around the back of your head. Most of the times I'll write a poem that isn't really very good until I've rolled it around the back of my head. I've gone back to it 2 or 3 times, and then eventually it does. There's a series of 3 poems in Drake Equation called The Dog Contemplating a Stoplight. And those were probably the best example of that for me, because when I first wrote those 3 poems, I was in graduate school and they were meaningful to me, but going back and reading them, they never made sense in a bigger context outside of myself. But I kept rolling around in the back of my head, and probably a couple years ago, they kind of tumbled into a better space. So sometimes it takes years, sometimes it takes weeks or days, or sometimes you can write in the moment and capture what it is that you're trying to relate.
That's useful. So you're suggesting we try to, as best we can, give ourselves we try to, as best we can, give ourselves a regular practice.
Right.
You are going to and you're talking about also iterating ideas. You kind of play with an idea and then it will kind of reemerge, and it's okay to grab it and sort of mess with it. And here's version, the next version, and then the next version, and then the next version. And that's, so you're saying that this doesn't have to kind of come out one and done, and
Right.
you're moving on. And you have um, and I think that's more of that's a forgiving way to look at the work that we're doing. Sometimes we, just like if we only see finished paintings, we don't have a look under the hood at the process of it. And a lot of these things kind of go through process.
Right.
But I'd say part of the advantage of being able to do that is that when you play with that process, you're giving your own brain time to refine these ideas.
Right.
And whether or not that turns out as a poem that is something that you like to show other people or not, that has helped you crystallize these ideas. And that is intrinsically useful in itself. So the process that you're describing sounds really useful to us as thinkers, whether or not they turn into a poem that you would end up showing to somebody or not.
Yeah, I've got folders full of poems that did not go anywhere. If you go through my journals, there may be out of 200 pages, there may be 20 that ended up being something that I've published. So yes, it's definitely, it's an exploration. You have to let yourself explore ideas, play around with ideas, jot them down. And I think somebody mentioned in the chat, reading poetry, obviously, finding things you like. What kind of poems do you like to read? But also challenging yourself to read things outside of that comfort zone. Those are also ways to spark your brain. Your brain reads those things, or in the brain um, is working behind the scenes, so to speak, more than it is in what you're aware of. Because most of what our brain's doing at any given moment, we're not aware of it. But sometimes it does emerge into our consciousness after it's tumbled around for a little bit. So by forcing yourself to explore your thoughts and ideas, you can pull some of that stuff forward and then be able to see it more clearly.
And this is, but also what we're looking at here is an active process. You're deliberate about this. It's an active process of thinking deliberately. What are you
Right.
noticing about the fabric of your life? How are you intentionally stitching ideas together? Sort of the YouTuber's guide to life is sitting around and watching something that somebody else has made and somebody else has thought about it and will consume this. More that we're deliberate, though, to kind of create these things ourselves. That helps us pay attention. It helps us to actually think. And I'd say that, again, doesn't matter if you end up with a poem that is going to be one of the ones that is published or not.
Right.
This process is useful for being a human being. And
I think so.
yeah, can I share with you the poem in here that first, when by chance, when I got these books from you, I opened it up. One of the first ones that I read ended up being one of my absolute favorites. And I was wondering if I could read it to you.
Sure.
All right, so I'm going to read. This is a poem from the Drake equation, and I thought that this was this was really really rich. And the poem is called Faux Rock Fireplace. And again, I kind of got your sense of humor in this too. So I love the humor in it, the outrage in it, and then the thinking in it. So it's Faux Rock Fireplace. What angers me the most is that the house made from concrete, formed to look like stone, stands on the side of a mountain, bleeding rocks of Earth's pasts. remnants of reef, ocean floor cobbled together by flood, fossils falling from hillsides like forgotten books, from disintegrating shelves, rock turning to soil against onslaught of rain and roots, and that the designers of this house, standing amidst this massacre, chose not to build a shrine to the ravages of time, but rather thought it more human to mock the earth as if we could deny death by insisting on dominion.
That was the house that my parents had in Cloudcroft, New Mexico. So that house had a faux rock fireplace in it. My father's a geologist, and again, I have some paleoecology, so thinking about time in these ways was kind of interesting, and it just kind of infuriated me. I mean, here we are. Look, all you have to do is pick up some of these rocks and use them to make this fireplace. Why was that not what happened? And there's a couple poems. That one is one of a few that I've written when I'm reflecting on human nature, kind of in a negative way, in how we try to separate ourselves from nature, and thinking about why is that? Why do we separate ourselves so much? And I think part of it is the fear of existentialism, and that we need to find some way that we have control or dominion over nature. So in that regards, in that place, that probably was much more mundane reason for using the faux rock. I mean, it probably was cheaper material. It was easier for them to gather, things like that. But the whole concept of even making concrete look like rock, it kind of gets to this human nature of trying to separate ourselves and consider ourselves somehow better or in control, rather than just at the whims of nature.
Yeah. This and it also just sort of made me think about, like, all this richness around you. If we choose to open our eyes to it, there's history, there's time that connects you with a sense of place.
Right.
I just sort of see this house being built kind of on this rather than in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
good way to say it.
and so yeah, that I went, ooh. So that was one of my first introductions to your work. And
I'm glad you like that one, because it was one of the few that kind of wrote itself, but it wrote itself a long time ago and took a long time to find a home, to find a place to put it. And so I'm glad that you like it, because it's always been one of my favorites too. And I've just never been able to find other people, I guess, other editors who have liked it as much as you have. I'd appreciate that.
Oh, whoever allowed that to kind of pop into this book, they get my seal of approval there. And that then sort of gets me thinking about humans and our relationship with the world here. I'm turning to page thinking about something that we think about often in this community is our role as as stewards of nature, and of taking care of each other and of this place, rather than getting an insular focus on what is going to make me happy, or kind of get me through in better condition to the next fiscal quarter, right?
Yeah.
And you wrote a poem called "The Tragedy of the Commons,"
Oh yeah.
that also is looking at this idea.
Mm-hmm.
I know, you know, Avea has spent much of her life dedicating herself to conservation and stewardship of wild places near her.
Mhm.
And in doing that, you know, we're making choices about what is important and how we want um, to kind of uh, live. Would you be willing to read this one to us?
Sure. And this one, this actually was sparked by watching a documentary called The Secret. I think you may have seen it. And it was trying to take the the paradox of the double slit experiment and claim that we create our realities from consciousness.
Yeah. Can I tell
And
you that bit of woo is one of my pet peeves?
yeah,
I it is I once picked up a hitchhiker who
right.
would not stop talking about The Secret.
Uh-huh.
And like if it is true that you manifest your own reality by wishing it so,
Yeah.
you know, everybody would be winning the lottery.
Right. Well, that's what the poem kind of gets to is never everyone can win the lottery, right? So when you make that claim about your ability to manipulate reality, you're doing it at the expense of people who are not aware of it.
Right.
So that's what the tragedy of the commons is about.
But this
There
is
are those, no, but go ahead and if okay. There are those who claim to have found the secret to contentment, prosperity, or wealth. And it always involves getting what you want, having the universe conspire to assist you. The grace of God shower riches upon you. And the secret is always for you alone. You can be smarter. You can be at peace. You can have your dreams come true. And it begs the question, well, conveniently skirting the issue of how your manipulations of this cosmic dance will affect others who have not discovered the secret and do not know that the cosmic balance sheet is tipped to those whose selfishness includes the fantasy of insularity.
that's just hit us with that last line again. I mean, that's
Yeah. Oh, you want me to read? Sorry, I lost the page.
just
Yeah. Um, there it is. So actually, I guess it's a long sentence, but just I guess it starts with and begs the questions at the beginning of the last sentence, which is actually in the next to last stanza. So it's almost half the poem, but
it's okay. We'll just
um,
I actually let's just here's what I often will do is I'll read a
mhm,
poem twice
sure.
because you hear it one time and then but you don't and you kind of a few of the ideas kind of bounce around in your head, but then you can really hold on to it a little bit more the second
Right,
time. So let's
right.
just from the start, just
Yeah, this is another one that it rolled around for a long time, right? It was an idea that I wrote down, and then it took a while for it to really click into place. The original title was Karma, but I think Tragedy of the Commons. When I came up with that title for it, is when it came together. So would you like me to read the whole thing again, or?
please do.
There are those who claim to have found the secret to contentment, prosperity, or wealth. And it always involves getting what you want, having the universe conspire to assist you, the grace of God shower riches upon you. And the secret is always for you alone. You can be smarter. You can be at peace. You can have your dreams come true. And it begs the question, while conveniently skirting the issue of how your manipulations of this cosmic dance will affect others who have not discovered the secret and do not know that the cosmic balance sheet is tipped to those whose selfishness includes the fantasy of insularity. So the other part of the cosmic dance idea that everything is connected, right? I mean, everything is connected. Every particle is connected. And some people have tried to draw from that, again, our ability to manipulate that in some way, rather than just being part of that bigger cosmic reality.
Yeah, yeah. Um, to those whose selfishness includes the fantasy of insularity.
Mhm.
The more that we accept the idea that we are deeply connected to everyone around us,
Mhm.
you know, that fundamentally changes the way we interact with other people. It
Mhm.
changes us. That realization completely changes us.
Right.
And that my prosperity at the expense of somebody else is their expense is also part of then my burden and my responsibility. And this poem to me just is an invitation to be connected with others, to be connected with the planet,
Right.
and that that the you know the contentment is not in getting the next thing. The contentment is being in the barber shop with your son there, or your son on your shoulders, and sort of realizing that this moment is this is where I am, and this is never going to happen again. And
Exactly.
aren't I lucky to be here?
Right.
Um,
Yeah, thanks. You really tied this together really well. Thanks.
that's what I do. The you know those pieces, um, those moments of our life when we pay attention and can be really present. Um,
Mhm.
that um, that is what that's what changes us. That's what defines us. And when if we can make peace with those connections,
Right.
then and you know I see also this idea of connection as a theme, as sort of a through line through so many of these poems. You know,
Mhm.
to be connected to the rocks under your feet,
Right.
right? To be connected to in time, to be connected through ideas, space. The more that we embrace those connections and work to those connections come with responsibility of
Right.
how we act towards each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's where true, if we can do it and we can find kindness as our a way to connect to the world rather than material things, then it enriches us, it expands us. We become bigger, more of a cosmic entity than an individual.
Mm. The I'm thinking in just a moment, I'd like to kind of open things to a conversation with, I know there's a number of people who would love to poke you with their questions. Um, Before we do, um, is there a poem, new, published or unpublished, that um, that you might that to you would be something that would be sort of good to kind of leave in people's hearts to sort of tickle their imaginations, um, as at the a sort of a conclusion for this discussion here.
Yeah, give me a second just to bring it up. But I am working on my third manuscript, hopefully. I've got enough poems for it. It kind of brings up the idea of how does a book come together too. And the Nebular Hypothesis, they weren't written to connect to each other, but when I started thinking about them, I realized they do. If you look at the structure of that book, the soul or the sun is in the center and everything swirls around it in time. It's not real obvious, maybe except to myself, but that's how that book came together. Nebular or Drake equation was a little bit different in that, again, I had like different directions of things that I was doing, and I found a theme that tied them together. This new book that I'm working on now is all based on, again, the photographs that I've been taking, specifically looking really closely at bark. Like the picture behind me is a redwood tree at the Henry Cowell um, trail. It's kind of halfway between the campground and the public entrance, which means it's about 6 miles away from either end. So it's not easy to get to, and you know, coming upon it is really an interesting phenomena. The one I want to actually bring up, though, was written at hold on, I'm sorry, it was written at Salt Point State Park, which is far sort of the other direction north of here. It's called Wait Here. Just listen to the drumming of the waves. Just watch the marbling patterns in the water. Stay focused on the here and now, on the edges of Pacific Ocean. Moment of time cut out of ages, sculpting of rock, remnants of nature's destructive forces, creating incomparable beauty. Don't look to the haze, confused horizon. There's no boundary there. Do not imagine what mankind has wrought, hidden below the waves, out of sight and out of mind. Ignore the impact we have made in such a short time, thinking it impossible to overwhelm such vastness, to pollute such endless vista. Focus with all your might on this brief respite, sitting on bench, overlooking the ephemeral, time outside of time, mind outside of body. So that's one of my more recent ones.
Yeah, can I get you to just read that one more time to us?
Okay.
This is really strong.
All right, Wait Here is the title. Just listen to the drumming of the waves. Just watch the marbling patterns in the water. Stay focused on the here and now, on the edges of Pacific Ocean. Moment of time cut out of ages, sculpting of rock, remnants of nature's destructive forces, creating incomparable beauty. Don't look to haze, confused horizon. There is no boundary there. Do not imagine what mankind has wrought, hidden below the waves, out of sight and out of mind. Ignore the impact we have made in such a short time, thinking it impossible to overwhelm such vastness, to pollute such endless vista. Focus with all your might on this brief respite, sitting on a bench, overlooking the ephemeral, time outside of time, mind outside of body. Now, part of that, again, working for the National Center for Science Education and helping teachers around the country teach about climate change, brought me face to face with a lot of the science denialism, but it also made me reflect a little bit on not just our impact on the climate, but the garbage patch in the ocean and all these other things that, and it's a series of poems where I've been on a coastline or I've been somewhere really beautiful, and you look out and it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, but or I know there's garbage out there, there's trash in those oceans that we have dumped into there over centuries that are impacting the health of that ecosystem. And so it's been difficult for me to separate from that recently, since working on those projects. It became really hard for me to separate myself for a long time. I kept writing about these injustices that we're doing to nature, in a sense, but I realized I was losing my own sense of gratitude, reading Robin Ruth Kimmerer, for instance, and how she's able to find gratitude in nature, even though she knows how much damage we've done as human beings. But having both the scientific and the sort of poetic side of looking at nature and finding a place to have gratitude for where we are and what we're seeing. So that was a poem that I kind of felt like gave me a pathway back to gratitude. So even though it mentions a lot about it mentions the garbage patch, for instance, not by name, but it alludes to it.
Yeah.
I was able to, at least in that moment, just enjoy the view, just it's so beautiful, right? And
Yeah.
we're lucky to be a part of it.
And for us as for people who are involved with stewardship, sometimes we feel, because we care so much, we feel it can feel overwhelming when we have to grapple with the damage which we're still doing.
Right.
And that's a big reason why I encourage people to get out their journal and get out into nature and to record those things is that it you need to refresh yourself in just how beautiful this and powerful and the good that is around us to help us be able to do the work to protect the places that we love.
Right.
Otherwise, we just we shut down and we hide from it because it is tragic. The more you love, the more seeing that which you love is devastating. And if we're going to be in this for the long haul, we need to regularly refresh ourselves in just the beauty and the wonder of this world.
Exactly.
And the and the other thing that helps us be able to do that is to do it together.
True.
This is a wonderful invitation to engage with the world. This is a wonderful invitation to play with the poetry ourselves and to use that as a tool to help us pay attention. So for everybody who's watching this who doesn't consider themselves a poet, I'm one too, right? Being a dyslexic kid, I have gotten scared of writing. And it is hard for me to start to try to write a poem. Every time that I do, I find it pulls me into kind of a place of being connected with wherever I am. And it's a really beautiful experience. And I want to encourage everybody who's watching to try this. And you don't have to use the mantle of poet. You don't have to even call it a poem, but just take some time to play with those words. Give yourself permission to just put a little more thought as to the ideas that you're juxtaposing one with the other and see where that takes you. And
But I'll just, one of the things that about me as a poet, I'm not a spoken word poet, right? I mean, I can read my poems and I think I provide some inflection that might help, but they're mainly to be read, which is a little bit different than sort of a current theme in poetry that, again, the spoken word poetry, which has become really powerful and important in the world, but it's not something that I really can connect to in the way that I can connect to things. So if you read my poems, they're structured in specific ways to try to emphasize specific points and specific words. As I read them, it almost sounds like I'm just reading prose. And it's somewhat intentional, but the writing of the poetry gives me an opportunity to not only get the ideas down, but to really craft them, to really look for where are those inflection points that I want to emphasize. Where do I break a line? Do I use commas or do I leave them out? What are all these little decisions that go into the poem as you're working on it after it's been kind of written, but as you flesh it out, that's part of the fun, right? That's part of the and how they're made. That's how poetry is kind of made. And I know a lot of you are makers, so if that hopefully that might appeal to your sense of crafting poetry rather than just trying to dump something out of your brain and hopefully it makes sense, right? It may start that way, but it's in the crafting of it that it really comes together.
That's inspiring. I want to just invite people to give yourself permission to try.
Yep.
Let's bring on some of those voices now. If you have comments, thoughts, or ideas that you would like to ask or share with Brad, we would like to invite you now to if we've seen any cool things pop up in the chat that we might want to share, or people would just like to ask their question directly. What you can do is you can use the raise hand function on Zoom, and we'll know that you've got something to share. We can unmute you and bring you into the conversation. And if sometimes it's hard to figure out where that button is on your Zoom screen, just turn on your camera if you're and in the gallery view, you can wave at us, and we'll know that you've got something to share. And the also, if you're feeling shy about that, you can also write questions into the chat. Avea will spot those, and we'll bring them to us. And while we are waiting for that, I wanted to share just another poem of yours that I thought was particularly relevant for us as artists. And this I thought was this resonated with me for a number of reasons. Your poem "Negative Space."
Mm-hmm.
First of all, on the page where it's printed, there's a big negative space right before the poem. So I noticed also your poem in here, "Gravity." It's down at the bottom of the page.
That was an interesting decision the publisher made. Actually, that wasn't by my design, but they decided to justify everything from the bottom up.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and maybe they did that because of this poem or those two poems. It was interesting to me too, because it caught me a little off guard when I saw the galleys. But I think it works. Yeah.
It's working. It's working.
Yeah.
Would you want to read that poem,
Sure.
or should I?
Either way, negative space.
Yeah.
Okay, I can read it.
Great. That's on page 16 of Drake Equation.
Quiet moments define the noise of our lives, like darkness defines the light, like negative space defines shape, opportunity. Dark matter holds the universe together. Dark times hold love, the darkness of our hearts, beauty. If you ask me why I crave solitude, it is not the settling of nerves, the rejuvenation of creativity, the rekindling of energy or passion. It is not the opportunity to define myself, nor to disappear. It is the chance to bathe in nothingness, to make sense of chaos, and weave noise into poetry.
There I see you pulling in dark matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That line about weaving noise into poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Is inspiring.
Hmm.
And this also for the contrasts in this, where you point out how darkness of our hearts also holds beauty.
Mm-hmm.
I, among others, sometimes suffer from depression, and when these things happen, it's easy to compartmentalize those parts of yourself and sort of put that down, but to realize like it's all part of the same package. I find sort of an invitation in this to be still, and it's just sort of a very generous accepting of who we are. So thank you for this poem.
Well, again, it's very gratifying to hear that a poem connects with anybody. You never know as a poet. Again, I think a lot of my poetry is kind of hard to access for a lot of people because of how much science there is in it. But you write for your own purposes, and then you maybe throw it out there and hope somebody else connects to it. It's very gratifying to hear that you have.
Oh,
There's a hands up, I see.
yeah, and we're going to bring into the spotlight here. Hold on a moment.
Oh, I spotlighted them.
Oh, okay, great. Hi there. Your screen isn't popping up with the visual, but that's okay. But we'll still be able to hear you. Oh, there you are. Hello, welcome.
328.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for this.
Oh, wait, hold on a moment. We're having a problem with our audio. Perhaps perhaps we could get you to turn. Let's try turning the video. Let's try turning the video off, and then more of the bandwidth might go to the audio. I'm afraid the Zoom goblin is messing.
She'll type it, she says.
Okay, great. We can type that in, and then
Okay.
thank you. Or
Gotcha.
oh,
is that better?
oh, this is much better. Much
Here,
better.
I can
We hear
type
you.
it.
No, we actually just heard you. We heard you speak now.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, now we do. Now we do.
Okay, so I was curious about editing poems. I feel like sometimes when I try and edit them, I lose like the authenticity of like the emotion of the first part of it.
Right.
But I also feel like it needs editing, and I'm kind of curious, like, how do you navigate that?
I mean, that is a challenging balance, right? Most of the poems that they start out emotionally, the connection that you have with something, but once you put it on paper, it becomes a more intellectual thing, right? It's no longer just the emotion of it being spilled out. It's also trying to express it to somebody else. How do you get this idea or this emotion to somebody else in a way that they can grasp what you're doing? So it does transition from very emotional to intellectual, and hopefully that balance kind of stays the same. I've noticed a few times with my poetry, it becomes too intellectual, and I'll pull back, right? And I'll just say, okay, no, it's becoming like, somebody were to read this, it's just like reading an assignment at school or something. You don't want your poem to be read that way, at least not initially. You want it to evoke the emotion that you're trying to capture. So sometimes it just takes multiple shots, looking at it again and seeing. And a lot of times I'll write something down that's emotional, and then I'll go back to it. Sometimes I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet to give up on that and make it more structured. It takes 3 or 4 or more times sometimes to go back and reread it to say, oh, okay, there's how I can express this better. Because you have to get a little bit of distance from the emotion sometimes to be able to think about the expression of it. It's like anything, you're supposed to show, not tell in writing. And in poetry, that's particularly true, that you want the imagery to express what you're feeling. But it does take a balance. And I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Oh, hold on. We can now. Sorry, it accidentally kind of muted you again. You can now unmute.
Well, and she's in the chat now. This question about authenticity.
But maybe, but before we jump to the authenticity question, just to sort of to add to that, because you have in your notes, you first got your initial process down, and then you can take that and you can refine it into something else. You still have preserved that first thing, that first capture. So scientists, when they're taking kind of field notes about things, they're not supposed to, you're not supposed to sort of just, that first kind of primary source is this really useful live document. And sometimes a sketch that you do of an animal will have much more aliveness than a carefully rendered drawing of it. But still doing that carefully rendered drawing will help you notice other things and think about it in a different way, and you still have that original sketch. So I would say that another thing just to consider is that part of this process may be that if, again, it's not kind of, I'm trying to kind of find the poem in it. And that process is really useful. And if there's any piece along the way that is useful to me in paying attention and being alive, that is intrinsically good in itself.
Yeah, occasionally a poem goes the other direction. I've got something I want to express that's more intellectual, that's more of a, hey, you know, I want people to think about this. And you have to find a way to find your own connection in an emotional sense to that. I wrote a poem about my daughter, for instance, called Pareidolia, but it's really about, or a lot of it is about my struggles early on with being a poet that uses a lot of science metaphor and trying to find places for those poems. It was not something
where you're looking at the moon, right?
Yeah. And it's because there's this sense that our knowing things takes away our connection, that by not thinking of the moon as in a mythical way, that we've lost something about ourselves. And I understand that, I appreciate that. But I also think there's, as I did with my Nice Dinosaur poem, you know, that there's more there when we know more, right? So there's deeper connections and more connections that we can make. Now, this is a little bit hard to read because it includes a lot of mythological figures that I'm not sure I can pronounce correctly, but I'll do my best. My daughter still sees the moon in the daylight. We watch it rise and set across the azimuth, waxing and waning in and out of sight, lost to those who neglect to look, those who have forgotten that the moon is just as likely during the light of day as in the darkness. Well, some bemoan our lost connection to the fable moon. No more tug of lunacy, no more portent of seasons changing. No more Koyolaki, Mani, Kansu, Mawu, Heng-O, Tsukiyomi, or Diana. Have we no more need of the moon? Has our communion with nature's cycles been replaced by technology? Our mystic connection lost to the knowledge that the moon is rock, held in orbit not by goddess, but gravity? No longer a guide for when to sow, when to reap, but simply a pale reminder of our mythic past. And yet my daughter is enthralled, not by the rabbit or trickster or tortured face, but by the prospect of going, moon as stepping stone to the stars, gateway to portals through time. All of her ambitions, all of her futures in superposition with the moon as luminous beacon for her universal quest.
I love that. And also just even the name Pareidolia, with your interest in sort of science and reason. Pareidolia is sort of when we see faces in everything from a piece of toast to a waffle to the moon, and then think that that's a sign that we should take some particular action over another. When we really just have a particular area of our brain that's designed to see facial patterns. And so I also love that the idea of pareidolia kind of works into your title there. With that, that's really fun. I've had that same conversation about that this sort of squeezes that science makes the world less wonderful somehow. But the more that we explore it, the more we see the wonders that are everywhere. And you know that if we are, you know, just to, you know, there are, if we are, the world doesn't get less wonderful as we start to
Right.
figure things out. One thing that we figure out, here's a deep space image, deep sky image from Hubble. They pointed the camera in one direction and kept it there for a while, and pow.
Yeah.
That's the image that they got. And that doesn't make this world less wonderful. It makes it even more incredible.
Right. That's the I think the image I have with New Universes. Actually, well, it's not that image, but it's that image is what I compared to the painting again in the Tate Gallery by Sam Francis called Around the Blues. And there's, I don't know if you have that picture or not, but it's also
Let me put that up.
Drake equation.
So yeah, so you were looking at this painting.
Right. And it brought that to mind. It brought that image of the, because I saw this fairly close to the same time that image was first published from Hubble. And the idea that anywhere you look, any dark spot, if you expand it, it's full of galaxies, right? It's just full of stuff. So no matter where you look, choose an empty spot of sky, every dark corner. If you focus a telescope on any blank space and leave the exposure of your camera open long enough to collect the light traveling toward us from the edge of the universe, billions of light years on its journey, yet streaming by just as fast as it started. If you collect enough of those photons and store them in pixels, they grow into galaxies and fill your field of view, exposing the empty space with color and brilliance. Move your gaze to the next empty spot and wait. Wait until the night sky crystallizes like marble from limestone on a canvas, knowing that you can zoom in on any single pixel and see an entirely new universe.
How amazing that we have a mind that can, it's one, begin to kind of wrap the edges of our consciousness around these things. Let's bring on Evea the Mad Botanist. Add you into the spotlight here.
First of all, thank you for this. I found this really inspiring.
Okay.
Making me want to get back into writing poetry. So now maybe I'll go do it. Also makes me want to listen to some David Bowie, because your appreciation for space kind of reminds me of the wonder you can experience in his music when the Ziggy Stardust persona.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to read a couple of comments from the chat. We have Cynthia Nicholson, who at one point had said that I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, often works as a prompt for poetry as well, just as a thought. Also, would you agree that like the more you like, are there particular how do we say, practices or activities that might help, like writing more often in stream of consciousness, or writing down, maybe sitting in a spot and writing down all of the different words that you can experience, to like that you feel about a spot, and then sort of choose one to dive deeper on, or write with a poem structure that's more like rigid and then kind of expand from there, like with Diamantes, you know how it says that you have to do like, this part is the noun, this part's the verb, this part's the adjectives or whatever, and then you kind of things like that. Do those help with you too?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple different pathways to a poem that you've kind of picked up on. One is the stream of consciousness that is evoked from an experience or an observation or a prompt even. The other one is the intentional kind of looking for the poem. And so those are ekphrastic poems, for instance, ones about the paintings. I mean, I went into the galleries looking for paintings that made me think of something to write. Right? There was intention there. So it was a response to something, again, visual, but it was knowing that I was looking for it. Whereas some of the things that I've written just on hikes and camping have been the opposite, where you don't know what you're going to find. Like the tree behind me, it's like, I mean, when I walked in upon this thing, because this picture doesn't do it anywhere near its justice. I mean, it's this huge, sprawling, just bubbling root system, and it just captured me, right? And I haven't actually written a poem about it yet, but it's on my list of things to write about. So I wrote down the observation, I took a picture of it, and then I go back and I reflect on that a little bit later, but it's, there's that process. There's also some things that write themselves in the moment when you're seeing something unexpected. So I like writing about the unexpected. I like writing about things that I'm not looking for. But there are also, especially as I've gotten now, I'm working on my third manuscript, it's kind of like the well's running a little dry. You kind of try to look for new things. And that's when looking for prompts and looking for something more deliberately is helpful. That can be how you get started in the first place. And then, sort of weave in and out of the level of intentionality that you have with your poem, how many are captured and how many are produced, kind of thing. Yeah, I hope that answers that question. Yeah.
What I like is that it sounds like you've got different processes and
Yes, definitely.
that use it different, and that seems super helpful, because then it might be a time when you get stuck when you're going through just one channel of finding that poem, and then you try a different one. Like, I like how you say that you go out to notice what's unexpected, like that gorgeous tree behind you, but then also that you went into the gallery looking. That reminds me of something that, and I know I don't say her name right, that I think it's Naomi Shihab Nye says something about that poems are everywhere, but what we do is, I can't remember how it goes, something like we have to explore in a way that allows us to find them. I can't remember. Maybe Jack,
I think that poems hide, right? And that what you have to do is live in such a way that lets you find them.
Right. I like Michelangelo's famous quote about the statue is in the marble. He just has to find it, right? It's kind of that process of creation that it kind of plays on the idea that all of these our connections to things are there already, but we have to discover them.
Oh, I like what you just said about connection, about discovering our connections to things. There were a bunch of comments in the chat as well when we were talking about stewardship as well. Anne was saying, and said something super wise. I think it was something like, we have to love the planet to save it. Yeah. Which I thought was super wise of Anne.
Very wise.
And then I say that that stewardship gives us a sense of belonging that's unlike any other.
I think so too, a deeper understanding. I mean, the nature-nurture thing that's been going on throughout my career, that's gone completely, I don't know, as old as I am, 61 years old today. And the early part of my career, when sociobiology was just really getting underway and we were still denying that we had instincts, and now we've come to realize how much our sociobiology informs us of the meaning that we find. Watching that arc of thinking across the time that I've been writing poetry has been really interesting. And this connection, like you said, of being stewards, it does require that connection. You have to love something to want to save it. You're right. And how do we get more people to feel that? It's not about thinking that. It's about how do we get more people out there? How do we get more people into nature? Just look around, just connect. Don't think about writing or drawing when you first go out there. This is what I tell students all the time when I'm trying to teach journaling. Just go out there, just find a spot, sit there, look around. What do you see? What connects to you? What does this evoke in your mind? Then you start writing it down and drawing the pictures, and it keeps building. But the initial connection through careful observation is the most important step.
Most definitely.
And did I just hear you say that it's your birthday?
Yes. Yes, you did. Yes.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday. And thank you for spending part of your birthday with
Well, being able to do this on my birthday is probably the best birthday I've ever had, because being January 4th, being so close to right after Christmas, right after New Year's, it's just always been hard to get anyone kind of excited about celebrating something else. So this is really nice way to do it for me.
Well, for your birthday, you have given a whole community of people here your inspiration. Those of us watching live right now, and those who will watch the recording of this, can use this to as a motivation, as you say, to get ourselves out there, to fall in love with this world.
That means that you're a birthday steward too, because you're here teaching us on your birthday, so you're also a birthday steward. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
And the so kind of a little tradition that we have in the Nature Journal group, we're talking about joining Avea on her birthday, is that we go out and we pick up some trash, or do a little conservation project close to home, in honor of somebody that we respect. So my goal today is I am, when our discussion here wraps up, I'm going to take my little daughter out for a walk. We're going to go down by the bay, and we're going to bring some trash bags and some big gloves with us. And we're going to, when we come back in honor of your birthday, the world will be a little bit of a cleaner place.
Wow. Wow. What a, yeah, choked up over that. That's awesome. I appreciate it.
There was, and I you know, you write really powerfully to about our impact on this world. I don't want to sort of end with something that is sort of emphasizing some of those negative things. But your poem "Smile Meant to Assure"
Oh yeah,
is such and so I'm what I'd like to do is Ann Chadwick still on? Yes. So Ann, I'd love to kind of get your reflection on this. Brad, Ann is the chair of the board of Point Blue Conservation Science, this amazing organization that gets sort of science evidence to help inform conservation decisions.
Awesome.
And this might have some particular resonance for you, Anne, but I thought that this was I read this poem last night and had to keep coming back to it several times. And so but would love to kind of get your take on this Anne. Would you read that poem to us?
Sure. I understand how people can refuse to believe, looking out over this perfect sea, upholding a perfect sky, the horizon's pristine colors and mesmerizing sounds of constancy, waves buffeting rock cliffs like children splashing in backyard pool, sea lions lazing in the surf and kestrels overhead, that the oceans have become so polluted that fishing as a way of life is going the way of family farms and coal mining jobs, coral bleaching as water acidifies, gyres turning plastic soup. I understand how tourists watching whales breaching the Beaufort Sea can fail to understand how thawing tundra threatens Aleut way of life as Arctic ice waxes and wanes more and more each year, and whale populations plummet, not because of harpoons and demand for ambergris, but because krill no longer teem in waters now too warm to trigger proper breeding cycles. Nature's beauty and majesty hide the fraying edges all too well, like a smile meant to assure a loved one that all will be okay.
Wow. That's,
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, my research background is restoration ecology, and I am a member of the Society for Ecological Restoration here in California. So I do try to stay connected to that community as much as I can.
Excellent. Well, thank you for all you're doing, and thank you for that incredible poem. I mean, I think when you read the earlier one, and I think it was at maybe at Salt Point, and you talked about like the the gyre of plastics and so on. But you talked about being in the moment and just appreciating that. And
Right.
here you're diving into
Opposite,
like,
yeah. Well,
what's,
yeah,
what else is going on.
yeah, that was actually written. I was in Cabo, San Lucas. I mean, it's kind of, I'm so privileged in my life. I've been to these beautiful places all over, you know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I need to just kind of step back and realize how lucky I am.
Yeah.
That one was written on this gorgeous landscape, but then knowing what I know, and you're right, it's the opposite side of Wait Here. Wait Here was written recently. This book, Smile Meant to Reassure, was written many years ago. So it's part of that journey that I talked about, going from kind of becoming disillusioned. I mean, geez, this battle, this struggle that I'm constantly fighting as a science educator and confronting nature, science denial, and so on, back to gratitude. That reality is still out there, and we can't ignore it. But we do need to step back every once in a while and appreciate what we still have.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to stay present and to have hope. And I think that I get hope from this community and from other communities in which I can feel like I'm making a difference and to take action. So whether it's going out and cleaning up in honor of your birthday or Vea's birthday, or just because you feel like cleaning up and helping out, or anything else you can do to support organizations or support stewardship or support friends and community in taking steps to make a difference. And that gives you hope, and it requires hope. So I think it's, and your poetry is helping to do that as well. So thank you so much, and happy birthday.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for being here. And thank you for the work that you're also doing with Point Blue Conservation Science.
Right.
Thank you, Jack.
I see that we've got 2 other questions, and then we're going to let you go.
Okay.
Because we've actually we're over the time that I told you that this would take. And thank you again for spending this time with us on your birthday. I'd love to bring up Shannon Phoebe.
Sure.
And let's see here.
Here she is.
Yeah.
Hey there. Well, maybe move your head a little bit closer to the speaker, and we might be able to hear you better. Still very difficult to hear you. Is there perhaps something covering part of the speaker? Shannon, it looks like we've lost part of your connection.
She's frozen on mine.
Yeah. And if it's possible to write
there.
I'm afraid we could you type the question for us? So we're sorry about that. And let's bring up the Mad Botanist again. And
I'll make sure that I read out what Shannon says as well. Because I keep hearing also the theme of overwhelm and hopelessness being brought up, which I think is totally an understandable and reasonable response that a lot of us have when we hear about just the overwhelm of what's going on with our planet. So also wanted to bring up this thought too about teamwork again, because we talk about it, but I think that it takes a lot to practice it and to make it a thing that we do regularly. It takes learning different skills, it takes organizing, but it's not as hard as we think. And a thing that really matters is making it regular, so that teamwork is regular. So we begin to regularly think of stewardship in terms of we, instead of in terms of just me. Wanted to add that. The last week we had the Kwanzaa I celebrated every year, and my favorite principle is Ujima, the 3rd principle, which means collective work and responsibility. Wow. So the more we do this together, then after a while, it's like what Anne says about taking action. You get that little dopamine slosh every time you see the trash bag and your friends out there waiting for you, or whatever your stewardship is. And I know that that's not the solution to everything, but I just wanted to offer that as well, just as a thing to help for anybody who needs.
Awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, we are in this together, and that's, you know, and your kind of your poetry that allows us. I read it and I connect with it. Allows us to sort of also build connection between each other. So when you express that in a poem, that ripples out. So to end, well, I guess I think that Shannon may be typing right now. But to end, maybe to end on a really kind of positive note, your poem "Ripple of Air Through Trees" is a celebration of being present and noticing, just putting words to some of the beauty that is around you. Another really important use of our of poetry, and maybe rather than end on maybe perhaps we can. This could be one of the final poems, the final poem that we read, just because it makes me feel really happy.
Well, that's nice to hear. I was, and it mentioned in the poem, I'm in Portola Woods, which is kind of some of my favorite trails. And there's a grove of redwoods that I was trying to get to, again, about 6 miles in to the park and all downhill. So I knew coming back up was going to be trouble, but I wanted to get down there and see the grove. But about halfway down, I started hearing the creek, but also air blowing, you know, the wind in the trees. And so this is written about kind of how both of those two things together and individually and together connected me to where I was. There are few places as quiet as the groves of redwoods in Portola State Park. I stop to listen to the silence, disrupted only by cicadas and tree frogs of my tinnitus. If I wait long enough, true sounds emerge, sounds of the creek, which is my destination, but still too far away. It is the breeze through tree branches, not simile for water trickling, but the same exact sound, like virtual reality placed in the mind by nerve-stimulating implants. Ripples of air through trees as sinuous as water around stones.
Ripples of air through trees, as sinuous as water around stones.
And I see Shannon's comment now about connecting science, art, and religion as historically being one subject, and they become separate somehow. Now, you know, kind of trying to find the consilience. I use the term consilience. There's a poem with that title in one of the books. I think it's probably in Nebular Hypothesis. But the idea that, you know, how do we reconcile? And again, as an evolutionary biologist, and you know, with religion and facing, on one hand, the denial of evolution because of religious belief, but also, again, the enrichment of connection by understanding more of the story, by understanding all of it. So the term consilience is one that has been used to try to find a way to connect the two together. So that is, I agree, that is a theme, I think, that is always there, right? It's always a challenge to find where do all these ways of thinking come together. And now that I've been a science teacher for 30-something years, and now I'm teaching English at St. Timothy's Catholic School. And so making this transition into an English teacher, thinking about sort of the pillars of the humanities, right? I mean, the arts and humanities. Science has always been somewhat considered the fourth pillar, perhaps, but not one of the 3 primary ones. But bringing science into it as the 4th pillar has always been the goal of mine. And trying to demonstrate that it is available. It is available for metaphor at a deeper level than what has been developed perhaps previously to our current understanding of the universe.
Yeah, as I love the idea of having science in there, not as sort of informing your writing and your poetry, but then also as a way of thinking and sort of celebrating, and the kind of deep geeking out that we can get into just brings such a joy to this opportunity that we have to being alive.
Yes.
And these poems are just shouts of recognition to that beauty that's around us. We all want to wish you a very, very happy birthday. We're deeply grateful that you came and joined us for this conversation and shared some of your process, your insights, and wisdom with us. And we are going to be looking for as this next book rolls out, we'll be looking for that as well.
Hopefully. And John, I really appreciate the opportunity to be introduced to this community, because I've been in California for about 6.5 years now. I'm still trying to connect to people here and organizations like this and efforts like this and so forth. So I really appreciate your opportunity, the opportunity you're providing for me to not just be here today and celebrate, my poetry and my birthday, but to feel part of a community that I'm just now learning about, and I want to know more about all of you.
Well, let's talk more about this, because we would love to have to play more in your brain.
Right.
And also, can I just say that personally, I'm just delighted and feel really lucky that you've come to my daughter's school.
Yeah, something brought me there. Whatever you want to call it.
Here we go.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. I'd also like to thank my amazing co-host, Avea, the mad botanist, for her help. And again, Avea's birthday is coming soon. If anybody would like to today head out and grab yourself a plastic bag and make a little bit of the world around you a little bit more beautiful. Or get ornery with some invasive broom, whatever makes you happy. And again, the 18th, that's your birthday, Avea? No,
I'm the 8th. The 8th.
The 8th.
8th.
Monday.
All right. So and don't worry, it is on my calendar. I just am not looking at that right now. So if you want to head out there on the 8th in honor of our dear Avea, we invite you to do as well. Everybody, thank you for being here. Thank you for the work that you're doing and the work that you continue to do. Remember, as we do this, let's celebrate this beautiful world around us, pay deep attention, and work together with kindness and gratitude to help protect and preserve this amazing place. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jack.
You, John.
See you all soon.